Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you very much for taking the time to join us for our webinar today. I am Shalon Mpasani with Yellow Seed Consulting. Yellow Seed Consulting, as it looks today, is a multi-divisional company with some critical focus areas. Our history, however, is firmly rooted in talent management and our love for development of people. The focus of our business today is to provide you with solutions that offer a full talent ecosystem. Our diverse team of creative, learning-obsessed individuals are dedicated to effective, meaningful change within the world of work through the power of modern assessments, agile talent management, team optimization, and contemporary learning and development. And for more information, please visit our website at www.yellowseed.co.za. But just for today, I'd just like to take this opportunity to introduce our panel speakers. Firstly, we have Professor Lomé Kukermo, Head of People at Yellow Seed and Professor at Northwest University. We also have with us today Natasha Thomas, Group Talent Lead at Coca-Cola Beverages. And last but not least, we have Jana van Heerden, Head of Organizational Design and People Analytics at Capitec Bank. And to our panel members, thank you so much for your time and more importantly, for your contribution to the world of work and the powerful insights that you'll be sharing with us today. I'd like to hand over to Storm Bellato, Senior Consultant at Yellow Seed Consulting, who will be facilitating the session for us today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Shalon, and hi to everyone on the call this afternoon. As mentioned, I'll be facilitating today's webinar, and I only have two rules for engagement today. One is we ask you to please mute your microphone whilst the panel are in conversation and when others are talking. And the second, we will open the room for questions after the panel discussion. However, should questions or comments come to mind during the conversation and you're holding your breath to share, please make use of the chat box. Our team is online to answer as best as possible. Alternatively, I will share each question during the Q&A hereafter. Great, so let's jump into it. And we're all here to learn a lot more. And while we remain aware that organizations are continuing to navigate tight budgets due to the COVID-19 induced economic damage, where businesses are having to do more with a lot less, and considering the long-lasting freeze on external hiring limiting talent acquisition, Lomé, can you say whether the practice of internal mobility and career pathing has changed in light of COVID-19?
Thanks. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Storm. It's so lovely to have you all here. And this topic is something that it's a topic that I'm quite passionate about. And I've had many conversations with both of my colleagues on the call that it really is, it's a topic that we're all struggling with, right? So all of our clients and those, the two peers on the call, it's not something that we've quite cracked yet. And if I look at just what some of the data is telling us, I read a fantastic study that was completed by Fuel 50 in the last 2 years, just around how internal mobility has shifted based on the pandemic. And they came up with the following stats. So 50% of employees said it was easier to find a job outside of their organization. 55% of employees said they are likely to look for a new job in the next 12 months. And this is quite staggering. Less than 33% of organizations have the technology they need to see their talent. And only 30% of HR leaders said employees had the tools to explore career paths internally. So we're seeing that most organizations are highlighting this as a strategic priority for exactly the reason you mentioned in your introduction. We know that internal hires cost less. We know it takes half the time to onboard. We know that they typically do better in our organizations. They don't leave as likely. But over and above that, with so much changing in our jobs, in our structures, etc., we're really seeing the role of internal mobility, and especially around agile internal mobility. I don't think we have the luxury to take annual talent cycles and map out everything perfectly and then go through it once a year, because by the time we've made the decision, something has already shifted. And so with another stat that I read from the Burson research said that 40% of workers have changed jobs, roles, or managers since 2020. So, and in some instances, in some departments, it could even be up to 80%. So we really are seeing that companies who are able to hire and redeploy really quickly, those are the ones that were most successful during the COVID time. And I've had some lovely conversations, I know, with Jana, for example, and what some examples of how they've deployed and reskilled individuals from one environment where there was maybe a reduction in the need in that particular department, and then reskilling and creating that mobility and implementing staff in a different area and redeploying them where there is a higher demand. So we've got, and I know, Natasha, you guys also have some lovely stories around that. So I do think that there's quite a big shift in terms of what internal mobility looks like. I think there's a much higher need for it in the current context. And because of the shifting roles, because of the short time span that we have to really redeploy, reskill, and redesign, even from a structural point of view, we are seeing a major shift in the need to accelerate skills development, talent development, so that we can meet the demands of the business. The environment is changing so quickly. And so from a talent point of view, that's the big challenge. How do we, in an agile, almost iterative fashion, do talent management very quickly, very responsively, so that we can address the demands of the business?
With such huge shifts at play and such short amount of time, Lemay, what would you say is the best starting point for an organization wanting to improve their internal mobility?
Good question. Also happy for colleagues to contribute. But I think for me, there's three things that needs to be in place before we start implementing any initiatives from an internal mobility point of view. I think it's quite important to identify what it is that you want. And so working with the executive team, with the senior leaders, and really identifying what are the skills, what are the talent demands that we need to achieve our business strategy, and specifically with the future perspective. I think that's super, super important. Highlighting what are those capabilities, what will the business require? So what is it that we want? What is it that we will need? Secondly, then, to measure what we have. I think that allows us to really identify that gap. What exists in the business already? What are some of the skills that might be lying latent in our employees? And really getting accurate data on the skills that we have, both from a level and a quantity point of view. Because once we've got that, then we can identify the gap and we can identify the priorities. Here's a team where we've got absolutely nothing and we really do need to invest a lot more. Or here we've got some proficiency levels and we just need to top it up. So I think identifying the gap allows us to then be quite strategic in where we need to focus our priorities first. And then from that baseline, then defining our internal mobility strategy. And I think maybe over and above that, to really not be too focused on these processes needing to be complete and needing to be exact. If we've got a sense of what we want, if we can deploy almost an accelerated measurement of the skills that we have, activating our line managers, getting their support in how we identify the skills levels, because I think that's the question, right? How do we do this at scale so that we can do it quickly? But if we don't have the data to really drive it in the strategic areas that we need to, it really becomes really difficult. So my advice is to start with the data. Once we've got the data, it becomes a lot easier to deploy technology, to deploy scalable solutions.
Absolutely. And maybe just from my side to add, I think we have had huge learnings as a company during COVID, because I think the significant lockdown restrictions, especially for us from a banking industry where 60 to 70% of our staff is client facing and only having a very short space in time to make a plan, really challenged us in a good way as a business to look at the concept of internal mobility, because we didn't have any other choice. I think as a business, we made a very big stance, or a very significant stance, to ensure that not only that we don't want to lose any people from a retrenchment perspective, but I think there was also for us a very significant component attached to engagement and people feeling that they can still add value. So a big drive for us during, especially the COVID scenario, was to say, how do we identify opportunities that is fit for purpose, where there's a skill set, where the person can just still continue operating, but it's just in a different business area. And then linked to what Lumea said around the practical considerations. And we all sat at home. How do you get a laptop and data access, etc., to a service consultant in one of our branches in the Northern Cape to enable them to actually support from a call center perspective and vice versa? So I think we've had significant learnings, but also at the same time, it is becoming, in certain cases now, a practice. So it has become an internal mobility strategy where we've always spoken about it. Now we've actually run a pilot and COVID forced us to run a pilot. But then I think also to link to what Lumea said is there's an awareness within the organization that from an internal perspective, we have a responsibility towards our team members. We can't continue bringing external talent on board, because at a point in time, the internal talent, the culture fit, the understanding of the business acumen is weighted more than just the technical capability and skill that a person brings to the table. So definitely COVID has challenged us in a very good way, but it's also given us a lot of learning opportunity, and it has led to practices that is now going to become part of our standard people practices, specifically around internal mobility.
Yeah, and Jana, if I can add on to that as well for us, I mean, so what COVID has really meant is that a lot of businesses have been put under pressure from a budget perspective, and to, you know, try and keep the business afloat and keep everyone employed. And, you know, the more we overlook internal people and look to the outside for the talent, where we say that an external person, which is an unknown person and an untested person, is more valuable or could potentially add more value than an internal person, the more we create internal problems where our internal people don't feel valued. And that results in an unspoken message or an emergent message where people want to leave the business because we see that internal talent is not valued as much. And for the business, that means additional costs. So if a business doesn't realize that there's costs involved in not valuing internal people, there's the time and cost of hiring people and training them up that becomes those additional costs.
So I think there's some really valid points made in that sense, and really pulling our attention to look internally, to look at the talent we have within the business and how we can better invest in that and give returns in that space. Just to add, Jana, you mentioned something else about whether we look internally. I came across a couple of results from a survey by Deloitte, and interestingly, the lack of information that organizations have for employees on or within available roles has or was considered amongst one of the top 3 challenging barriers for actual internal talent mobility strategy for the business. The highest one ranked there was the lack of process to identify and move those employees. So I think it would be so great for us to continue to explore more of what actionable strategies can be deployed to drive a successful internal mobility strategy within organizations. Natasha, let's start at you.
Great. I mean, we have an annual talent process, which is run by the Center of Excellence. So we have a very clearly defined template about each senior role and the roles that report into that, and what would be the key criteria for being succession. And we also define for each of those roles what we refer to as cover ratio. So for example, you know, do we have a 1-person cover for the specific role, or do we have a 2-person cover? And, you know, we also define further criteria than that. You know, if the person is cover, are they cover in the next 12 months because they're already ready? Are they 3 to 5 years out? And if it's longer, are they really covered? Or are we just being polite about them being covered just to have them as, you know, your succession to my role, but 5 years is a really long time. But let's just say someone is, you know, 2 to 3 years out. You know, if it's not immediate cover, what are we doing to actually develop those people? So as much as we have it on a template and we have it on a deck, you know, we really encourage line managers during the performance review period to discuss, okay, you're a succession for my role in the next 3 years. How do we develop you and what are the gaps in order to get you ready for those roles? We also, so we do that. It's a huge annual process. And you know, as much as LeMay says, you know, it can't be an annual process. For us, it really is an annual process. We wish it could be. We don't have the specific technology tools to make it a quicker process. You know, that's a part of our future. For now, it's quite a manual process, but in that there is value because there's discussion around these elements and around people. So there is value to the manual nature of it. But those tools really lie in getting you know, for us to be devil's advocate to line managers in, is there really succession and is there not? And you know, what we've also done is we look at something called mission critical roles. So we identify, instead of who's the hot 50 people in the business, what are our hot 50 roles? You know, if we were the Titanic and those 50 roles, you know, we didn't have cover for that, essentially the ship would sink. So we look at making sure that at all times, those critical roles have cover immediate. And it's part of an ideal future. We don't always get it 100% right, but that's been quite a big drive for us in terms of action. Instead of focusing on people, let's focus on roles and making sure we have cover for that. Because we're such a big business, you know, going into every single role becomes much more difficult.
I think maybe just to add on to what Natasha has said, I think, you know, the concept of talent reviews is currently a standard practice in our organization as well. We've been very lucky to start introducing a HR system called SAP SuccessFactors that I'm sure some of you or majority of you are familiar with. But a part of that drive is really to start creating visibility of data and all types of data linked to the employees in the business. What we've ever found is that although the practice in the conversation is extremely value adding, and I mean, we also talk about talent depth and readiness ratings and scarce and critical roles, etc. We found that in the space that our organization is in at the moment is that the traditional succession planning is done against a specific job. So you look for a depth coverage for a specific job. But at the rate that our organization is changing and we are recrafting roles, the conversation from a succession perspective is not readiness for a job, but what skill sets do you have that you could potentially transfer from one role to another role, rather than are you fit for purpose and how quickly will you be fit for purpose for a specific role. So I think that's the one change. And then, as I said, you know, with a ever-changing organization, repurposing, reviewing roles, looking at creating new capability, it is challenging us at this stage because the system that we've acquired, and I'm being very honest, is set up against a very specific traditional way of succession planning. So part of our journey now is to say, how do we start having the conversation around internal talent, but not who is ready for a next role. It is what is the skill set that this person can bring to the table. And that is also for me a link to what do we know about our people. So when we started introducing our system, the first focus was to encourage our team members to log into the system and actually create visibility of who they are. And the challenge or the opportunity was, tell us more about yourself even before you join the organization, because that is the value adding data that you actually require of individual. You want to know what is this person doing, not just in their work life, but also in their personal life. What passions and interests do they have that you might not know of? And in that space, even with last year COVID, we have actually unearthed individuals that are in one role, but they've got a whole skill set and a practice that they're doing in their personal capacity that you never knew of, and that skill set is actually something that could be of use in another opportunity. So I think talent reviews will always be there, but I think the cadences around when you do it and the agenda is going to definitely be challenged if we start moving towards not just fit for purpose for a specifically defined job, but really around skill set. Some of the other internal strategies that we also have always supported is internal first. So in a lot of our cases, and specifically around new opportunities within the business, we advertise all of those positions internally, because it does link to our first conversation around creating awareness of what opportunities are available and giving individuals the opportunity to raise their hand, even if they're not 100% fit for purpose. But there's an awareness and an understanding of what's happening in the business. And if there's an opportunity where we have to select, there's 2 shortlisted candidates, the preference would always be that the internal candidate gets the opportunity, especially when it gets to promotional opportunities. So I think that whole concept of internal first is something that we definitely support and encourage quite widely. And then there's this new concept of the internal marketplace that I see popping up continuously in conversations. We have started engaging with different organizations and companies because it's a platform-driven opportunity. And that is definitely something that we want to migrate to. It's almost like a social media platform where you can advertise opportunities and say to somebody, listen, here's an opportunity. It's not maybe a permanent job, but it's an opportunity to be considered for a project or a secondment or a meaningful piece of work. If you've got the capacity and the interest, raise your hand. And we give you an opportunity to step into that opportunity. And I think that is where, as an organization, we ideally want to go, because it empowers the individual to make the decision. It moves away from, I need to always be considered for a full-time job, because there are other opportunities where you can enrich and be stretched in your current role. And secondly, or lastly, I think it is incredibly important for us to encourage individuals to drive their own career and not be always dependent on HR is advertising a position or my line manager is having a career conversation with me.
Jana, if I can maybe build on that, you could see me smiling, right? Because I'm doing a session on innovation and agility, the neuroscience of innovation and agility tomorrow afternoon. And while I was researching, I came across this fascinating research piece that showed that organization, and it was specific around the COVID time, which I think obviously makes sense because we were forced into it. But the research showed that organizations that adapted a variable skill strategy, where they pertinently, like the examples that you shared with us earlier, wanted to give variable skill development opportunities to those individuals, those organizations had a significant higher case of innovative ideas, innovation, culture indicators. So, it just made me smile that I think this notion of a talent marketplace where we move away from the traditional, there's only one way to do succession, and that's either up or maybe sideways and then up, but it's based on jobs versus, well, what is the variable skills that we can offer to our employees? And could someone possibly have 2 jobs in one organization? Could they fulfill more than on more than one project and have variable skills? And Carl, I see your comment around the gig economy. Could we possibly have someone who just works 2 hours a week or 8 hours a week or just in the mornings, and they fulfill that role while they're doing something else? So it's an interesting time because it really stretches out, especially the talent folk, because we like to have our systems and our processes, and we want it to follow, especially when you're dealing with scale, when it's thousands of employees. But I think it is stretching us to really think about, how do we, I like what you were saying, how do we empower our employees to reach out and say, well, actually, my successor has this skill, but there's something else that I'm interested in. How do I activate that career path? And maybe it's something that I just do for a while and then I come back, but I'll be richer for it. And so I think, there's a real opportunity here for us.
So we've actually had a few play arounds with agile methodology in this respect, where we've had a few organizational problems that we thought we would throw to the younger community in the business. And we put them together for a whole week to work together on some of these problems the business was experiencing. And at the end of the week, they got to present to our ExCom and our CEO on some of the solutions they came up with and what the budgets would be for this, to give them some visibility as to more senior members of the business. But the most crazy thing about just doing something like that is that they came up with solutions that were so amazing and so out of the box and so exciting and actually so doable. And they got visibility to senior members of the team, which just showed us that it doesn't really matter what level of the organization you're at. You know, we kind of create these levels where we say you've got to jump from level 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, but actually, you know, people can contribute in different levels. You know, if we give them the opportunity to contribute and to be part of something where they feel like they're adding value, they can. And, you know, there's been a lot of talks about growth with just lateral movement. So, you know, if there is a project and we don't have the budget for gig workers, getting people into these teams on a project basis, even if they're really young, to give them the opportunity to show their capability for the future. And it's really, really been an eye-opener, because it's been exciting to show you that you don't have to do the traditional jump from 1 to 2. You can have graduates come into the business and add value on a country level, or even on a full-scale business level. So it talks to exactly what you're talking to, Lomé, about just projects being also an opportunity, and gig work, but internal gig work.
We maybe just to share another example that we've seen with one of our clients, one of the major insurance financial industry players in the country. And we were on a project to help them really think out of the box, so at scale across the whole of Africa. So, you know, I think there are constraints, but to think about, how do we offer development opportunities that are cost effective, that can be scaled, that can be personalized? So someone needs to initiate, but we provide tools and opportunities that are available. And I think exactly to your point, we also involve the business to try and identify what some of those opportunities could be, so that it's not just, let's tick our learning and development need, you know, from the employee side, but let's also address some of the business needs. You mentioned that from a project point of view, they will inevitably also address some of the business needs, with whether it's through a project or an assignment. Those are real business problems. It's not some fictitious hypothetical thing in a classroom. It's real work. And so we implemented from company-wide coaching and mentoring opportunities, informal, reverse mentoring. We looked at gig assignments, and especially the internal gig assignments. We looked at, if there's a particular topic that you're really good at, you're the expert in, can you create forums or training sessions where you teach those skills to others? So there's lots of opportunities, I think, that could be implemented if we, I do think the challenge, however, is how do we measure, how do we track, how do we contain, you know, and from a business point of view, ensure that it's still within the parameters of what the business strategy is and what the general focus is. But I think within those boundaries, there's a lot of opportunity to do small, meaningful pieces of work and provide variety. It doesn't just have to be, we're going to send you on an MBA course, or, you know, we're going to send you on a secondment. I think there's a lot more that's opening up, and that's perhaps, I think, what a lot of the excitement and the opportunity could be.
Jan, I do see unmuted there. Just want to check if you have anything to add in light of what's been shared.
No, I think just maybe a final comment is we spoke a lot now about the business buy-in and partnership with any of these interventions, but it is also challenging our line leaders around just standard management practices, because you need to now be comfortable that you will have somebody supporting in your team that is not necessarily reporting to you. And that really encourages the concept of continuous conversations around role clarity, delivery, contracting, as well as feedback on a more continuous basis. But also at the same time, the ownership of the individual that's working on that piece of work to drive their own delivery. So it does link very nicely, Natasha, with your concept of agile, that the short feedback cycles, staying on track, even if I don't see the individual on a day-to-day basis, even if they don't report directly to me, that I'm as a line leader aware of what your progress has been, but that we also can, support you if there's any blockers in your path to ensure that you can still deliver on time.
Sure, definitely. And I think we've heard so much about the way in which organizations can bring about opportunities for growth for individuals in the business wanting to grow their career. And I thought something quite exciting here, and we've spoken about it, that creating the culture of internal mobility is more than just restructuring parts of teams. It's about changing the way careers progress, how they're perceived and how they're managed in that light, right? How we recognize talent with the information we have and invest in that learning and development. And so just parts of accelerating that skill and productivity level of existing talent. Jana, do you think agile or innovative job design could be used as a mechanism for talent acceleration in a space like this?
No, absolutely. And it's such a topical topic for where we're at as a business. So when we started on our journey to start using SuccessFactors as our HR platform for information, one of the key areas was to obviously start creating visibility of all the different jobs that we had in the business. And unfortunately, for a company of 15,000 strong, we came down to 1,600 different jobs. Now that doesn't make sense. So we are actually at the moment busy with quite a significant project, and it goes really back to the basic concept of job architecture, as well as looking at the concept of job families, where you really go and critically look at your business. What are really all of these roles within the business that have similar skills, experience, and qualification requirements? They might just be called something different. And how do you cluster those jobs into a job family that will enable, I think, more mobility, because we will automatically be able to see, although the job sits in the retail business and the other opportunities in business banking, it's the same job. There's maybe one or two elements from a technical perspective that the individual needs to gain to make them fit for purpose, but also the speed at which we can move people. So rather than following a more traditional recruitment process where a position needs to be advertised, it's a similar role, it's a lateral transfer. The individual can just be allocated to the new team. The focus is then on onboarding the team, equipping them with the relevant technology and capability to actually start operating. So it's going to be quite a journey for us, because it's very different from where we're at the moment and our thinking around jobs, because we think, if a job title is unique, the job is unique. But if you start scratching under the surface, it's actually in essence, especially if we start talking about the technology and data space. I always make the comment, a business analyst is a business analyst is a business analyst. You can call it a different thing, but it's still a business analyst. And I think that's where, if we start looking at really tapering it down, really identifying what are those key job families, and more specifically the skills and capability that is generic across the business. I think it's going to be a very interesting journey for us around our internal mobility, but also more importantly, our development journey. Definitely what we've touched on earlier in the conversation, the more traditional way of development, and especially again, if we talk about the digital and data space, we have to think about it very differently. So we are also embarking on quite a journey around developing internal academies. So how incredible would it be if we define those skills and capabilities that is generic or consistent across the business, and an individual can just in time pool the learning through an academy or a learning platform, acquire the skill on the side, and when the opportunity arises, the person would be available and fit for purpose at that point in time. So yeah, I think there's lots of work to to do. It does challenge everything that we've done up to now, but the business understands the need for it. Because if we want to be agile, if we want to be able to move people quickly, but still ensure that they set up for success, we have to embark on this journey. So it's a bit of the dark work of HR that we need to do before the business can see the value.
You're on mute, Storm.
No problem. I saw Natasha unmuted herself there too. Just wanted to check if you
Oh,
wanted to
yeah.
contribute there.
Yeah, Yana, I think for me, it's the amazing thing is the first thing is just job titles. You know, I don't want to speak from only a personal internal perspective, but just being in the, you know, the acquisition space, job titles are becoming quite crazy in this new world of work. I mean, you know, we're calling the same job 7 different fancy names. It almost becomes quite consuming and confusing as an actual candidate in the work in the marketplace, because job titles are becoming, we're just becoming so creative, I guess, but it does make it quite confusing. And you know, the second thing you were talking about is just allowing internal candidates to be able to get a skill in order to get a job. And I think that's super amazing, because there's probably a lot more that we could do of that in terms of, as a talent community, staying closer to learning and development as to, these are the things we need to get our internal people ready. These are the courses we need available to build our internal marketplace. You know, I think we're always so consumed with just individual development for specific career paths that we forget about exactly what you said, job clusters and the learning and development around that, which is giving people the room for lateral job movement even. Because when I was actually reading up on this topic before I got in here, actually not everyone wants upward career mobility. Even a lateral move gives someone an opportunity for growth. It gives someone the opportunity to build their brand and show that they're versatile. And you know, I think that's also really important to look at how much lateral movement we can give people to grow their, you know, their depth and give them various roles. And yeah, it's really cool to see that that's happening.
Yeah, I think then just maybe one topic that is probably keeping me awake at night is if we start talking about these generic roles and job architecture and clustering capabilities. To a very big extent, one of our biggest challenges is we're based on what we know, where the business is at the moment. And we all know that at the speed at which organizations need to be able to adapt, and I mean, again, from a Capitec perspective, if you asked me 2 years back, would you guys start a business bank? I would say no. And where we're at now, we've got a business banking division. So it is again the partnership with the business to really understand that there is a current reality, but what is this future that we're working towards? And Lumay, I again looked at the work that we started doing around the future capabilities that needs to be defined, and how quickly can we define those capabilities and ensure that we don't just equip people to be ready for the now and the certain roles and capabilities, but how can we proactively identify, based on where the business is going, what are those capabilities and roles that would be required for the business in the future? And I think that is where the partnership again with business, but businesses buying into the value that HR and specifically the talent community can offer, is to be part of those conversations, to start listening out for those cues. And then the opportunity is then to start building those capabilities, even if it's not for the now, but it's to make sure that we've got a talent depth or a coverage of capable people when the opportunity is available. So that's a huge opportunity. We're definitely not there yet, but I think that is something that from a longer term perspective, especially when we start looking at a job architecture and identifying key critical capabilities, that's going to definitely be our next step.
Maybe to add on, Ayana, just on that point, I think that is the challenge around job architecture, right? Specifically, that we define our job architecture based on the activity, that's traditional, right? So when we base it on the job and the activity, so there would be competencies, etc. Whereas I think a lot of the movement that we're seeing in many of the other organizations that we work with, and it really is tricky because it's so completely different to what we're used to, is designing our organizations based on our skills or capabilities rather than our jobs. It almost forces every form of structure that we've come to know to, it just requires a complete redesign. So I'm not saying that is exactly what we need to do, but I do think that is the challenge, is to start shifting our mindset from the activity or the scope of work, or even the knowledge from where we came from, to what are the capability and the clusters of capability. Do we structure our roles and our organograms and our architectures around capabilities and taxonomies, for that matter, rather than the jobs? And we might be far off, right? So we might not be there just yet, but I think we're starting to merge into a hybrid place where we need to, yes, we fully understand the job architecture and the world that we came from, but how do we overlay the capability discussion? And maybe for the audience, we've been involved in a really, really great study together with a Northwest University and many of the financial services companies that we work with to uncover what are some of those future capabilities from an industry point of view, because we also recognize that it is not just one organization's responsibility. It's a South African and African, we've taken an African focused responsibility to be future looking and to start identifying what are some of those capabilities that we will need in the future, and then how do we create development opportunities, how do we create mobility opportunities, how do we partner with educational institutions, with the CETAs, with, I think it's an ecosystem problem that we all need to address together. But there is a definite shift, as you mentioned. Yeah.
No, Megan, I think as well, the millennials started the conversation. I want to say the millennials, but the millennials started the trend of saying that every 2 to 3 years, if an organization doesn't know that I can add more value, or that I'm becoming comfortable and I want a different role, that I will look to add that value somewhere else in another organization. And, it started an organizational conversation around every 2 to 3 years, if a person's been in the same role, and even if they're performing phenomenally, it's time to look at giving them a little bit of variety or something different, or a lateral move. And if as a business, we're okay with leaving someone in a role for 10 years just because they're awesome at it, and, we don't want to look at some different opportunities for them, then we will lose people in that way. Because even if you're a good performer, people do become bored or, too comfortable. And every 2 to 3 years, if there isn't something significantly different in your role to, keep you excited and stimulated, then you'll look for it elsewhere. And, for us with COVID, you're finding that because there's lots of remote working opportunities, people, if it's been 5 years and they've been in the same role, they go into the external marketplace to look to find that value somewhere else. So that's also become a big challenge to know. Another point on that is people don't want to work for line managers who think they're awesome but keep them in the job for 5 years because they think they're awesome, and doesn't advocate for them to take on different roles. So rather promoting them to something bigger and better, rather than hugging onto them just because they're great, that in itself is not a compliment.
100%. And so I'm also hearing a lot with regards to the shift that is needed in mindset, that internal talent mobility needs to be a strategic initiative. There's also stakeholders involved here, and not just HR. Referring to what you mentioned earlier, Natasha, And also, like you've mentioned in the chat box, Lemay, we need to empower our line managers to deploy this internal mobility, get them a part of this, get them involved. They also hold a lot of the data that we need from the employees in the business. Natasha, how would you suggest we coach line managers to support internal mobility and talent acceleration, and perhaps get them engaged in the process here as well, skill them in that space?
Yeah, I thought this is a really awesome question because, you know, we refer to them as line managers, but they're talent champions, right? That's what they are. That's their role in the business. And, you know, you almost want to give line managers a badge that says talent champion. Like, they need to be reminded of it every day, that's, you know, that's actually a core role, is building and strengthening organizational capability by helping us identify talent. So as much as there's talent people sitting here today, it's not a talent thing. It's an organization-wide thing, and line managers are, you know, the key to that kingdom. So for us, it's really about, and we, you know, we've written it down in a guide for line managers. Your role is to advocate for talent in your team. So if you've got someone talented in your team, you need to talk about them, and you need to share the compliments about them, and you need to say that they're doing really well, and they need to know about it, and other people need to know about it. And then secondly, you need to identify and talk about talent that you identify in your peers' teams. So if you see someone's doing really well and they're thinking outside of the box and can contribute elsewhere, we encourage line managers to also do that, to talk about not just their own team, but other teams as well. So that's the other key thing. And, you know, what we really want is for line managers to help us in thinking outside of the box as to how they get their talent to grow and flourish in the business. So, you know, we come up with all of the creative courses and the secondments, those opportunities, but it could be really a million other things, you know, say, letting them spend time in factories, or getting them to have a little short-term assignment at a different company that is not ours, or getting them to go on a market tour for 2 weeks. You know, those are the things that line managers know that as an HR person, we're not always all the wiser to, or maybe we are, but they can come up with amazing suggestions. So as a part of that, you know, the thinking is to empower line managers to play a bigger role in this. They see talent, to talk about it, and it doesn't have to only be people in their team who they give a performance rating to, and also to tell us what we could do more creatively in developing people, because, you know, 9 times out of 10, if they make a suggestion, we're willing to support them on getting the person that exposure and that experience. And more lately, people don't want to do courses, they want experiences, and they want projects. So that comes from actually things we can offer them internally with very little budget. So yeah, if the suggestions come up, we'll do it, but we really want line managers to know that role. So we talk about it all the time. And, you know, when we do what we call calibration sessions, where we look at performance ratings for everyone, come, you know, performance rating time, we encourage line managers to talk about the broader community and people that are doing well, and to put it out there so we know that this person has potential to move into different roles.
Yeah, I think maybe, Natasha, I can't agree more with you. The biggest challenge that we sit with is that the line managers don't want to share their talent. So it's becoming, I think it's, you know, we've got incredible people internally, and if the person adds so immense value to your team, the mindset change around it's not my talent, it's our talent becomes, I think, one of the biggest opportunities / challenges when it comes to line leader development and changing of mindset. And then if I look at the individuals that as line leaders have really been the talent champions that really stand out, there's a couple of things that they just practically do that I'm still thinking, I don't think it's something that you can train. It's just something in the makeup of the person and their thinking around people and talent. It is really around being open for taking a chance on somebody that is not 100% ready, to spend quality time and effort in ensuring that person is very clear on what is the expectation, and that is supported with continuous feedback. So it's not waiting for the formal performance review discussions, but really to continuously engage with that individual to allow them to know that they are on the right track or not. And then, as I said, sometimes to give them an opportunity where they don't feel confident yet, but to support them through a project or a presentation to Exco and say, I am going to let you fly by yourself. I will be there to support you, and I will buy the coffee or the wine afterwards, depending on how the engagement goes. But I think to show the trust and the support in that individual to say, I trust that you can do it. You might not believe it now, but I'm going to give you an opportunity, and through the learning experience, hopefully you will build the confidence. And then I think lastly, from a cultural perspective, is we all say that we want people to take ownership and to learn through either successes or mistakes, but it's how we respond if something doesn't go well. And I think from a line leader perspective, if we start thinking about feedback, if something doesn't go well, how do we provide that feedback that the person can see that as a learning journey, but more importantly, to actually celebrate the successes. And sometimes, lots of companies that are extremely performance driven, we tend to focus on the things that are not going right, and to really go and deep dive on it rather than really celebrating the successes and making a big thing about it. Because again, that builds confidence, it creates awareness of opportunities, and there might be just that one other person that says, you know what, maybe this is something that I need to raise my hand for in the future. So yeah, I can't agree with you more.
And I think just to add on, so I did emphasize line manager, but it actually is employee owned, right? I mean, you've actually, as an employee, you've got to take ownership of your own growth and your own journey. And that's something we emphasize in the business, which is it's leader led, but it's employee owned, that growth. So you've got to advocate for it yourself and ask for it yourself to get those opportunities. So the onus is not only on the line manager, but also a culture of accepting mistakes. So, or giving people the room to go through trial and error. So that's something that we've also been encouraging as a business to encourage innovation is, yeah, it is a safe space to make mistakes. And it is a huge mindset change, because it's easier to say than it is to do in practice.
If I can maybe just add, Storm, two ideas just to build on what Natasha and Jana was saying, two ideas that came to mind. So we, especially around the celebrating the wins, I think that's such a critical thing that you mentioned, Jana. And we've had the privilege to almost see it as from a marketing point of view, right? So we've got a lot to learn from our marketing colleagues. And we created a whole communication campaign, both from the employee perspective and from the manager perspective, to tell the stories of how internal mobility or talent development has not just helped them, but helped the team, helped the community. So I think there's also something to learn from storytelling, and how do we celebrate those wins? How do we break the mold of let me hoard my talent, by sharing stories of how it worked out for the good, and maybe not just for the person that's moving on, but also for that line manager to then realize one of the particular stories was how a new team member then was forcibly introduced, because this line manager didn't really want to let go of their person, but inadvertently got a lot of diversity and creativity because of the shift in the team. So I just got that idea. How do we communicate and really sell those stories of the good news and celebrating the wins, I think is crucial. And then the other idea that we've also utilized, especially to support line managers from a mindset point of view, is to help them see the big picture. I think those of us that are in talent or learning, we have a good idea of how from talent acquisition, all of the different steps filter in, and why talent reviews are so important, or why talent data is so important, because we can see the big picture. We see the data entering and how it filters through. But for a line manager who enters a talent review once a year as a performance conversation just with his few people, I often think it's quite difficult for them to see that big picture. They're not involved in the talent acquisition piece. They're not involved necessarily when the remuneration decisions are made from start to finish. And so with a couple of clients, we've introduced simulations where we take line managers in a very fun, interactive way, where there's points and there's a winner and there's a loser. And when you make certain decisions, it has an impact, but we expose them to the entire process so that they can see the big picture of why do we say the role profile, and really identifying the capabilities is so important. And then we'll have certain parts of the game where it is present and when it's not. And then they realize, oh gosh, it's really difficult to make a decision when we don't have that data. Or later on, when we give them the opportunity to develop their people, and we deliberately take away the option of just sending someone on a training course because they said they wanted to. And we force them to think about, what is the motivation? What is the aspiration of this individual? What are some of the capabilities that they've got? What is the succession or the retention risk here? And we get them to think about that big picture. And then suddenly they're like, oh, wow, now it makes sense. I understand talent, rather than just, oh, I come into a boardroom once a year to discuss the talent that I'm exposed to. So I think that's also an opportunity to use gamification or conversations, however you do it, but help line managers see the big picture from start to finish so that it makes sense in terms of what is required.
I think there's been some lovely ideas and contributions shared. Always exciting to hear more about those and how we can take them back and put them into practice. I am going to check, just for the sake of time, if there is any other contributions from our panelists on the call before we jump into questions from the audience. Great. So again, thank you so much, Jana, Lemay, and Natasha, for the lovely insights. I think we've learned a lot of takeaways. Again, like I've mentioned, we could trial and practice within our own businesses. And so I want to open up the floor if there are any questions from our audience. If you've been biting your tongue, holding your breath, the time is now. You're welcome to raise a hand and we'll orderly work around the room. I believe everybody's toolboxes are well equipped after the last 60 minutes.
So maybe there's one more point that I maybe want to add, especially around at scale. And I see Bianca's hand is up. The importance of marrying the employee need, especially in terms of aspirations and learning requirements, and the business need, whether it's from a succession point of view, whether it's from a transformation point of view, critical roles or strategic capabilities that need to be built. And I think that's, for me, where the magic lies. If we are able to really understand what the employee need is, the aspiration, the requirements, what gets them excited, and if we're really good at understanding the organizational need, and whether it's through a technology platform or through robust process, to get those two together. And honestly, I think for an organization, anything bigger than 1,000 employees, I think it is really difficult to do it without technology, especially if you want to make it really personalized. And so that's where I think there's amazing technology platforms being developed that help us to get those two to talk together. And that's where a marketplace, I think, Jana, that's what you were referring to, the opportunity to map out these two and get them together. But for me, that's the magic. If we can get that right, I think internal mobility will be super successful. But if it's not, if it's too heavily focused on the business need and we don't regard the employee, it's not going to work. If we are too focused on the employee on the other end, and it's not meeting the business demand, then we're going to have really happy, engaged employees, but we're not going to drive the strategic initiatives that we need to. So I think that balance is super critical. And we've partnered with Fuel 50, who is one of the talent marketplace companies that's exactly what they do, using data and visualizing that. So I do think that there is a place for technology to support us, because usually the talent team can only look at so many people all at once, and our line managers, as much as we want to educate and help them, I don't think that's even the capacity that they have. So let's marry those together. Let's use data, let's use technology, let's visualize them. And I think that really is a recipe for success at scale.
Thanks, Lemay. Thank you so much. Bianca.
Are we not out of time though? Is it okay if I quickly pop a question?
Not a problem.
Okay,
So
cool.
we have got time for question and answers until 4:30. So you're welcome to take the
Perfect.
time.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So thank you. First off, this was really, really insightful. I think obviously we are very aware that internal mobility is one of the best retention strategies there is. If that's the only thing we do, if we do that really well, we get pretty far. The one thing is there is also obviously a major financial business case for it, but I always get stuck with proving that to line managers. I think that's an insanely good way to prove return on investment, to kind of show them money wise how much cheaper it is, just to look at the people in your team. Even though training is pretty expensive, in general it just helps to start internally. So how are you guys using the metrics, or what type of metrics are you using to kind of to build that business case and to prove why this isn't all just fluffy, amazing, the people team thinks this is a great idea, that type of scenario? I'm keen to hear about that.
So maybe I can share with you some of the things that we have started doing on the Capitec side, because I can't agree with you more. Is if and working for a bank, the money and the numbers speak. So what we, for example, have started doing is to cost our acquisition activities. So we know exactly from the salary of the talent acquisition team member to the time and effort it requires from the point where the recruitment activity is visible right through to the point of appointment. We can cost it. We can actually put a rand and cent value attached to that. And obviously it's all the other operational costs, assessments, the line manager's time. Obviously, if you add their salary to their time and you do a calculation, you can actually cost both an external activity and an internal activity. And that's sometimes a very interesting matrix to look at as a very good first start. I'm busy with an analysis, or a team member in my team, and my analytics team is actually doing an analysis based on our last year's terminations to look at the cost of replacement. For example, if we look at the positions that we had to fill last year, in the last financial year, based on individuals that have left the organization, what was the cost of us to bring a candidate on board? And again, to look at internal, that we fill the seat internally again, or did we have to go to market? And then if we went to market, what was the profile and the salary attached to the candidate that we had to bring on board to replace the internal team member? Because there's a very interesting picture that is starting to emerge around it. So again, if we talk about the value of internal mobility around engagement and giving the individual the view that they are being valued, in some cases, it is sometimes a very quick fix, things that we need to put in place for the person to stay. So it's that balance between the pull and the push factors. And if we have to replace an internal individual, especially from an intellectual property perspective, that's something that we haven't been able to measure yet. So we've got individuals, obviously all of us have got individuals in our business that understand the business so well. How do you cost that? How do you value that? And then it is back to the talent conversation. If we proactively identify those individuals that are not necessarily in a key critical role, but have such a combination of intellectual property in themselves, understanding the business, how systems operate, how things just get done, how do we look after those individuals as well, and not just, you know, from a retention perspective, look at the individuals that are in the top seats. But I think, again, going back to your question, a very good place to start would be start with the basics. Look at what metrics and measurements you have in place around costing from the point of initiate recruitment up until the point that the person is in the seat, and what is all the costs attached to that. And then to look at the internal versus the external dynamic. You know, what is the difference in a costing? And I promise you it's going to be an incredibly interesting view if you start adding the numbers. And obviously from a Capitec perspective, we are in a very fortunate position that we recruit hectically lots of people. So it is to find that balance. And then if you link it to your termination view as well, is to say that the effort that you put in, the proactive strategies that you put in place, and you start costing it and you put money behind it, then the numbers tell you a story that any financial institution, any organization that looks at the bottom line, they can't then fight the view. They can't fight the facts that you put on the table.
Thanks
Maybe
so much, Jana.
To add to that, Jana, Bianca, I know you asked about the metrics, but I think it's also important to, as an HR fraternity, we also need to understand what is important to the business, right? What are their strategic drivers? What are the things that are important to them? And if you can translate what is important to that line manager and how it links to the internal mobility strategy that you've got, and how this is a lever to actually get to what they want. I think that's often something we need to entrench ourselves in their business and understand what are their major frustrations, what are their major challenges, because I can promise you there's a people side to it, always, there will be. And even if you take the company strategy and really go and understand how does that impact internal mobility? If we don't get this right, we won't get to that strategic driver that we're earmarking in 2025 or 2030. So I think it's also about having the metrics, having the details. Some of your line managers will be quite detail oriented and cost oriented. Some of them might be more big picture and strategically oriented. And then you must be able to sketch that picture for them as well. What's important to them? How do you tell that story? Good question, by the way.
Thanks, Limon.
Thanks, Jana. Thank you, Lemay. Bianca for the great question posed. Just checking again if there are any other questions from our audience. Over here, Lisa, I see your hand has been raised.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I actually think Lemay touched a bit on what I was going to ask, but I think I'm actually want to direct this question at Jana specifically, just because I'm really curious, thinking of a company like Capitec, with, you know, a lot of employees. So just a little bit of context, I guess my question is, I know we've talked about, you know, the ownership lies with employees as well when we talk about internal mobility and talent acceleration, but of course we need the investment of the talent champions, you know, the line managers, for effective facilitation, right? And we talked a lot about line managers needing to, you know, make that mind shift to this newer agile approach to internal mobility and talent acceleration. And I know we also talked about, you know, using a data-driven but also a conversational approach to this. And I'm sure the exact approach will obviously differ from company to company, but I'm just thinking of Capitec with like 15,000 employees, implying a lot of, you know, talent champions. So I'm just thinking, or I'm curious rather, where do you start with that process of transforming line managers' mindsets and really to convince them to buy into this newer, you know, agile approach?
Sure, it's a Lisa, it's a very pertinent and a very relevant question. in some areas in our business, it's so entrenched, especially in our operations or our branch environment, because the roles are very much the same. So a service consultant, that's our entry-level position, is the same as a service consultant in another branch. You know, I probably shouldn't use the analogy, but I call it the McDonald's of banking. So the need from a talent mobility perspective, and to make the conversation around movement of people pertinent, is where our talent conversations become extremely value adding, is that the line leaders actually, as part of their quarterly reviews, talk about talent and how can we move people laterally and upwards in the organization. So it's so entrenched. And it's part of their standard meeting routines and agenda to talk about people and people from a talent perspective. So lots of effort have gone into that space, because I think also the understanding in the operations environment is that I need the right people in the seat to service the client, that ultimately is going to lead to the business deliverable and our profits. So in that space, it's so entrenched. Our biggest, I don't want to say challenge, but opportunity is more in the specialist environment in our head office. And we've been having a bit of a journey around line leaders understanding, you know, their role from a talent mobility, talent development, you know, the mindset change perspective. But it hasn't really landed up till, I would think, last year. We went on quite a journey to redefine what are our leadership behavior or our leadership principles that we want to almost encourage or support as a business. So we went through a massive drive to define what the leadership principles or leadership behavior should look like within the business. And a significant component of the leadership principles is linked to people, not only from a normal management routine perspective, but relentlessly attracting and developing people is now a core principle or core behavior that we expect all line leaders to live to. So we've been on a process now of socializing these principles, giving individuals an opportunity through quite a few divisional conferences to really understand what it means, because we're also picking up that line leaders are not always on the same page. We talk about relentlessly attracting and developing people. What does it really mean in practice? And through these conversations, the penny is starting to drop, to understand that I have a first responsibility towards my team from a talent perspective. That is my role. You know, there's obviously an operational, tactical thing, a strategic thing that I need to do. But as a line leader, I can't operate and I can't achieve my objectives if I don't support and encourage and attract and develop my talent, because I work through them. But I think the big opportunity is to start driving the mindset around it's not my talent, it's our talent. That we haven't gotten to yet. But I'm very, very positive that if by making it a pertinent behavior and say this is what we encourage and what we expect of line leaders, I think it is not a thing that people can say, but I don't understand or I don't see it fit my role, because it is every line leader's responsibility now to live those principles. So it's a journey. We're not there yet, but at least the conversation around the principles and talking to those principles is really opening up the door to have these conversations and say, this is your job, this is your responsibility. How do we ensure that line leaders are then held accountable to live to those values?
Thanks, Jana. And sorry, I realized I was so rude. I didn't even put on my camera when I asked the question. Only halfway through. But yeah, no, awesome perspective. And I feel like I'm bowing down. It's like a massive task to take on. But yeah, love to learn from your approach. So thanks.
Thank you for the question, Lisa, Jana, and just the input shared as well. I think we've got to start somewhere, right? No
Yes.
bigger the size, and a great way to start that too. If everyone is comfortable, I'm going to take the silence as a very good understanding of the conversation had today online. And it's all thanks to our panelists on the call, Jana, Lemay, and Natasha. The collective, a wealth of information, knowledge, experience that is really immeasurable. And so thank you for taking the time out today and spending it with us and everyone on the call, and to all our attendees. Thank you so much for joining in, hearing us out, and staying, so I'm hoping so attended behind your screens. Just checking again from our panelists if there's any last words that you'd like to leave everyone with. Otherwise, that's from us, and we hope you have a great afternoon.
Thank you, colleagues and attendees. It's been great. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to share.
No, absolutely. I think for me, it's great to have these types of sessions because it is creating, I think, an opportunity for us to talk about what we are experiencing, but that we are sharing the same successes and challenges. So hopefully, yeah, just if there's anybody that wants to engage further, I'm more than willing to have this conversation offline again. But thank you for the opportunity. I think it was a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Jana. We'll try and keep your details private. Private enough. Natasha, sorry, I interrupted you there.
No problem. Yeah, thank you for today. I think, you know, even just coming into this chat, there's always so much to learn from each other. So it really is awesome to have these opportunities to talk about burning topics.
Thank you, Natasha. Definitely good opportunities. All right. Well, we hope to rub shoulders with everyone on the call soon again. We hope to hear more of your success stories, and we wish you a lovely afternoon further.